Hey y'all, so today basically I'm talking about this article by Liz Zhu, and it's actually a dissertation from the University of Southern Mississippi. And the article title is kind of a mouthful, but some highlights of it, we're talking about visual communication strategies and how it goes hand in hand with branding strategies. So basically using those different core concepts of branding and core concepts of visual communication strategies and how that they can mesh together to basically create the perfect branding strategy. And we're specifically talking about Instagram in this case. So bear with me, and I'm going to go through a little bit of this article. So basically, I'm going to the summary page. So the purpose of the current study is to provide a more specific and complete visual branding process on the most popular visual-based social network site, Instagram. So basically, Instagram as far as social media is concerned, users of social media have different motivations for using each platform. So there's been a lot of research on relationship-based platforms. So those are platforms such as like Twitter, Facebook, where you're connecting with others and communicating with others. But Instagram is different because it's a visual-based platform. So this is basically just discussing on how to brand specifically for a visual-based platform rather than a communication or relationship-based platform. And what this like first paragraph is talking about is that it's basically talking about when you process a visual stimuli, it activates two different parts of your brain at the same time. So basically, you're receiving obviously like actual visual stimuli, like what the color is, what the movement is, that kind of thing, but you're also receiving an intellectual stimuli at the same exact time. So basically the study is broken up into two different experiments. And so you can see right here, it says in study one. So the first study is specifically on just the visual elements. And then the second study is specifically on those intellectual elements. So the key to understanding this study is recognizing those two stimuli, and the literature review really helped me get a better grip on what each of like the different facets of those stimuli were. So we're going to talk about the literature review a little bit first. So it first like kind of gives an overview of how the studies were conducted. And so like obviously you can see like study 2 investigates the main interactive effects of visual and intellectual units on brand image, brand love, and brand respect. So those are like intellectual things that we're actually going to be able to measure later on, or that they measured later on. So basically, the literature review started with this section about visual. First, it started talking about social media and gratification and how consumers like get gratification from social media and their motivations behind using social media. And then it went into the visual elements, which is basically what I'm more focused on and what's more applicable to my project. So this part of the literature review basically is showing the different motivations of why users are using it and how that affects those visual elements. So you can see like these are actual branding strategies. So self-express their personal identity is the reason why customers are using it. And so these different branding strategy perspectives that you can see fall in line with different consumer motivations. So this one is a brand as a product perspective. So this specific example is using a large size image of their burger. And so obviously like the product is the main focus. And so the brand as a product, that would be your branding strategy. And so it's basically applying those consumer motivations for Instagram, how they're looking for self-expression and that kind of thing to figure out which of these branding perspectives would be best. And then we're going to talk a little bit about visual language and visual themes. So that's the next topic that they bring up in the literature review. And so it talks about how the visual themes are divided into basically 4 different emphases and then branding strategies. So this is combining what we just talked about previously. So customer centric, employee centric, product centric, and non-branded. So obviously we just talked about a product centric visual theme with that burger example. And then basically it's talking about how it assessed these like 4 visual themes, basically using different examples and like what basically what examples can show how to relate the visual themes to the branding strategy, if that makes sense. Um, Now, so this is just an example that I highlighted. Basically, product-centric business. We talked about the burgers, and it intends to, quote, help build competitive capabilities and sustain competitive advantages, focuses on quality improvement and cost reduction. So like shot with a close-up, extreme close-up, that sort of thing. So it's basically, as I said, combining branding strategy and then how to actually photograph it for that strategy. Next, we're talking a little bit about view perspective. So this is another important element in visual imagery. And basically view perspective is talking about like the actual way that the picture is shot, like the camera angles, that sort of thing. And so obviously it says, we have first person and third person views. Those are the two view perspectives that we're going to be kind of analyzing in these different studies. And so all of this literature review is basically building up. These are like the different visual elements, and in combination, that's what the research is going to address, of which combination of these different elements is going to create the best strategy overall for Instagram. But I found these really individual, like really nitty gritty parts very interesting and helpful, at least for me, just because since I'm creating a branding project, obviously these are things that I should consider, like when shooting photos for social media copy, that sort of thing. And so then it basically goes in depth about different branding studies itself. So we're moving sort of into more of like the intellectual elements, literature review. And so we're basically talking about those intellectual elements that are triggered by visual images. So brand familiarity, this is something that's really big in marketing. And basically, the more familiar a consumer is with a brand, the better off their chances are of that consumer either purchasing it or repeat purchasing it, depending on if the association with the brand is positive or negative. And it just talks about a couple of implications of brand familiarity. So obviously my brand, I'm making it up, so it would be unfamiliar. So I thought this section was really helpful, just that they might make more efforts and dedicate more cognitive resource to extensively process the information of an unfamiliar brand. So obviously it takes more effort, so you have to create something that's going to make them want to exert that effort, basically. And then the last concept related to this that's really important, I think, is personal relevance. So personal relevance is basically exactly what it sounds like. How relevant is whatever brand to the consumer? Can they relate it to their own life? All that stuff. And so basically the importance behind this, you can see in the second highlighted sentence, when personal relevance is increased, strong arguments are more persuasive, but weak arguments are less persuasive. So if you make something relevant, you have to present a really strong argument with it to make sure that the relevance is actually applicable to the consumer and that they're kind of like following along, basically. Yeah, it basically plays a role between the amount of thinking that you're willing to put in and the amount of persuasion it takes you to buy something from a brand. So those are some of the key parts of the literature review, and those are just some definitional things, and then also it provided some resources in the bibliography. Obviously they're citing their sources, and so that helped a lot for me. And then next I'm going to talk a little bit about the hypotheses section. So this is a little more complex. So this is where it gets into more marketing research. And so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this just because it's a little more jargon, but I wanted to show an example of like the hypotheses. So compared to the pictures with third person perspective, the first person view will lead to more fixation frequency, longer duration, and then they have sort of sub hypotheses under each hypothesis. So they're testing a lot of different elements to figure out the best combination. So they have to test for each combination. And I just wanted to show a little bit of an example of that. And they also did a really extensive job of describing exactly how each hypothesis would be tested. And this is really helpful just for my future research in my marketing career and for my thesis. But yeah, 5 item 7-point semantic scale, that's survey research. So we have a combination of eye tracking and survey research, that sort of thing. And I wanted to include just a shot of, so these are like summaries of the information that they found in the results section. And this is like pretty digestible, pretty easy to understand. Except I wanted to include just like a little picture of like the tabulations for it. So this is more marketing research focused, but it was harder for me to understand these parts, but between the literature review and the summary sections, I could kind of piece it all together. Yeah, so this is an example of a little summary paragraph. So Instagram posts with product-centric pictures generated longer total fixation duration and more fixation frequency on areas of interest. So that's important for me and potentially making social media posts for my future festival. Product centric posts generated longer fixation durations. That means they're looking at the post for longer. So maybe including like a wristband or a shot of a crowd, like that kind of thing. That's a product centric post. You're focusing on what the product actually is. And then lastly, I just wanted to talk about the discussion section a little bit. So the discussion section was where I found like kind of a lot of the, outside of the literature review, a lot of the relevant information for my project. So it describes how each branding strategy is effective on Instagram. And obviously, I'm doing a branding package and I want to do social media copy, so creating fake posts basically. And so these like strategies are awesome because it gives like, you know, consumer motivation. So it's saying like consumers who are highly active are more likely to want a consumer centric post with a first person view. So you can really like look at your target market and apply whatever strategy is necessary for Instagram, but also there's further implications past that for just other visual platforms and other social media channels in general of how to effectively brand for each of those. So I thought that was just a really helpful and relevant article to what I'm really trying to do. And it went way more in depth than I thought it was going to, but I really enjoyed reading it. And I think it did a really good job of explaining like some key branding concepts that I'm really going to need. So yeah, I'm excited to continue moving forward and hopefully apply some of these concepts in the future to my own branding package.